Hello. Name of the talk is Shifting Left and Kicking Off. There's a reason for that, and I'll kind of come into that as we go along. So a little bit about me. I have been testing now for about 20 years. I've been in several different organizations, several different types of places. I've also worked as a developer, Scrum Master, business analyst, but most of the time I have been a tester. And I've done a few conferences, and if you really, really are desperate, there's some stuff on YouTube that I've done at various conferences that you can have a look at and then put nasty comments on afterwards. And I am on YouTube and LinkedIn. Not YouTube, I am on YouTube, but I also am on Twitter. So if you do want to get in contact, please do so. So a little bit of background about NBM and Vonage as it is now. But when I joined 8 years ago, it was NewVoiceMedia. And we talked a little bit in the previous one about Agile and how we're an Agile company. We're more of an Agile Lean Scrum Band type company. We're, as every Agile company is, we're our own variation. There's no set way of being Agile. We are our own version of that. We started being Agile about 9 years ago, so about the year before I joined, and there was a good reason for that. So in the year before I joined, we tried to get a release out, a live release of new code. And it took 6 months. We took 42 attempts and 6 months to get one release of live code out. And it was probably James's fault, but and that's why we kind of realized we had to change the way we worked, the processes that we were doing, because they were not working, they were not sustainable long term. So within 1 year, we changed from 2 releases in the year to 1 release every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. We do trunk-based development. That was another thing we decided at that point. We were not going to branch our code. We have one single trunk of code. Everybody commits to the code. We do not do branch-based development. And we have a single main application, which is known internally as the monolith. So this is the one that was kind of started almost 20 years ago when NewVoiceMedia started. It's been added to over the years, and it is large, unwieldy, and very hard to actually kind of cope with. But that's the main thing we test against. But obviously that's also not sustainable going forward, so now we go to microservices and we go to API first. And the way we work is we have small feature teams. So each feature team, we have about 16 different feature teams at the moment on the NewVoiceMedia side of Vonage. Each of them 3 to 6 developers, 1 to 2 testers. And also about 3 or 4 years ago, we decided to go DevOps. So we are a version of DevOps. Again, like Agile, every company has their own version. Our version is to try and make sure that we get ops involved right from the very start, just like we do with the kind of the testing side. I did talk here last year, and I kind of read all the feedback I got, and the main piece of feedback was to make sure that this year I kept the kitten pictures in. So we have kitten pictures. And they're all brand new. So it's kind of some themes of what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about collaboration, shifting left, team responsibility and communication. All of those are quite straightforward, apart from maybe shifting left. It's kind of a term we use in the testing community about getting the testing done much earlier in the life cycle. So when I first started testing, it was you get the business analysts would create the actual thing, the specifications, would present it to the developers. Developers would go away for 6 months, do all the code or development, and then they pass it over to the testers who then had to try and test it. And that's not the way we work anymore. Now we try and get those testers involved right from the very start, get the whole team involved right from the very start of every piece of work. So first of all, we're going to talk about kickoffs. This can be a kickoff of a brand new epic, a brand new whole new feature, or when we've broken it down into single stories. Basically, the essence of the kickoff is the same. And the number one essence of that is to ensure that everybody is involved. The kickoff is the most important meeting for the entire team, and especially for the tester. In the old days, you kind of used to go along, take a few notes if you were invited. Sometimes you weren't even invited. Nowadays, it is the meeting that you should be going to, and you should be playing an active part if you are a tester. It's probably worth saying that testers we hire primarily for communication skills. It's not about your experience or how you've actually tested in the past or whether you can get your head down and do something. It's about how you communicate. It's a key ingredient for everybody in our department, but the testers specifically. So how does our kick-off meetings, how do they work? So first of all, we have the product owner comes along, and they come along with the requirements, not the solution. They come with the requirements. What is the need of the customer? What problem is the customer trying to solve? And that's what they bring along. And then the whole team discusses it, gets to a mutual understanding of that piece of work. We want to know as a team what that means to us. We want a shared understanding of the requirements. And that is every member of the team. That is the developers, the product owners, Scrum Masters. Also, we can get people from Ops in if we need to. But it's the entire team. Everybody who is interested in that piece of work, we want in that meeting discussing it. Architects as well is a new thing we kind of started doing. But we want everybody involved in that meeting and everybody vocal in that meeting. So once we've kind of done that initial discussion, we kind of then want to turn that into something we can then work with, which is the acceptance criteria. So changing the requirements into a set of things that we're actually going to test against. On the screen there are about 8 different ways that you can do acceptance criteria. Thing about NVM is we do not mandate which one of those you use, or multiple ones of you use. Every team we have, 14, 16 teams, each one is different. Each one has different personnel with different skills and experience, different ways of working on different bits of the product, and working in different ways. So why would we tell them this is the way you're going to work? Each team is responsible for how they work. They have the autonomy to decide what's best for that team and to ensure that evolves over time as well. So these are a few of the variations. Hopefully you'll know about most of these. So about 5 years ago, the reason I've got the book up there is because it's a really good book. If you're new to this kind of stuff, read that one. It's a good place to get started. 5 years ago, that was kind of mandatory reading across the department. Not quite as much now, that's kind of advised reading, but it's the kind of thing you should be starting with if you're new to the whole specification by example stuff. These days, most of our teams do example mapping, and the link in the brackets there, that's actually what most of our teams use. It's a web application. It's pretty good. It's actually, even though it's now a global thing used globally, it was actually done by one of our developers in our office. But it's really good, and it kind of works for us, and he kind of expands on it. And it is freely available, but it's kind of what half our teams are using at the moment. Mind Map's also very big, and Mind Map is kind of the one we use there. But all of those things, again, what's best for your team? What's best for the people in it? Work out what's best and work with that. So the next thing, we're still on the kickoff. Everybody should be asking lots of questions. It's not a meeting where the product owner comes in and tells you stuff and then you walk away again. You want to be asking questions in that meeting. You want to be asking every question you can think of. Anything you're not sure about, you ask the question. Kidding, sorry. It's not the case anymore where you kind of go out the meeting, then you have questions and you kind of write them down, you think about them later, and then you kind of send an email over. You want that shared understanding. You need to be asking the questions there. One of the things we kind of say for a test is there's no such thing as a stupid question. Because if it's a question and you're not sure of the answer, that means somebody else isn't sure of the answer. Or something is ambiguous in the requirement. Or something else is not clear, will not make sense to the customer. So you have to be asking the questions, and you have to be asking it in this meeting so you can get that joint understanding as a team. But it's not just about the requirements and the product owner bringing those in, or the business analyst, depending on what flavor you go with. You as a tester have to be vocal in that meeting as well. And it's not just asking about the requirements, it's actually telling people how you're going to test this thing. What you're going to test, how you're going to test it, what you're going to test it with, what data you're going to use, and what your expectations are at the end. This isn't a secret anymore. In the old days, that was what we used to do once we got the code on the test environment, but it's not anymore. Now it's about having this conversation up front in the kickoff meeting before a line of code is written. The reasons for that are reasonably straightforward. Basically, if you tell a developer, I'm going to test it this way and do this, put this information in, he'll then know that actually that's going to happen, and he's got to code around it. He's going to look pretty foolish if you've told him all the things you're going to do, and then they all break when it gets to a test environment, and he's not going to want to do that either. So in this meeting, it's about you giving the information as much as it is about the product owners giving the information. It's about the collaboration side of how we develop stuff now. It's not about somebody telling people this is how it's going to work. It's about the whole team deciding. If you're breaking down an epic into small stories, because we work with stories, the other thing to do is to make sure they are as small as you can. It wasn't unusual when I first started to have things, a developer would have 2-3 weeks, and then you get it and it would take you another week or two to test it. Problem with that, of course, is if you find something wrong, if you find a bug, by that point the developer is off somewhere else. They're on a different part of the code, different part of the project. They're not going to want to look at that bug you've just found. They're not interested anymore, and they're not in it. They've got to do the context switching if you want to go back. So what we do is trying to make the stories we work with as small as we can. Hopefully a single moving piece of the application. Not 86 different things changing at once, because then you've got a much more complex system that you cannot test successfully. 1 or 2 things changing, you can really test that really well, really deeply, and really, really quickly. The developer will still be actually in that piece of code with stories that small. And it just makes it really quick, and the most important thing in the way we work is to get that feedback loop as small as we can. So if you're going to find something, you find it quickly, you feed it back quickly, and hopefully people can fix it quickly. And I mentioned about kind of ops being involved as well. When we start a new story, the other thing is, unlike the old days, as we're DevOps, we're now thinking about that story going live. We're not just thinking about that functionality that's in that story. We're thinking about how's this piece of work actually going to work in a live environment. So we have to think about things like the performance, security, deployment of that system, monitoring it in live. Do you want alerting in live? So what's actually going to be happening? Is everybody just reading this now? Because that is my favourite. But all of these things you need to be thinking up front. Documentation is really important, and is important to get up front. It's no good having a really, really good piece of functionality working in live if your customers do not know how to use it. All of these things have to be in the discussions right from the very start in the kickoff meeting. Last line I put is just about any other relevant non-functional stuff. Our test team got together a few months ago and kind of went through all the non-functional stuff we could think about, all the different types of non-functional testing. We came up with about 46 different ways of non-functionally testing something. Obviously, they're not all going to be relevant for what you're doing, but some of them are. So you need to be looking at what you're doing, the application you're working on, how it's going to go live, what is relevant to you, what is relevant for your team, what is relevant for that piece of work. And you need to be thinking about it right from the very start, right from that initial kickoff meeting. So how do we decide when we're kind of done in the kickoff meeting? Well, we have a definition of done. So this on the right, this is my team's definition of done. And again, as I said earlier, this isn't something that every single team has the same version of. It is not mandated this will be your definition of done across all our teams, because all our teams are different. They are working on different applications. Some of this is relevant for our team, some of it's relevant for other teams, some of it isn't relevant for anybody at all. Hopefully they're not in there. But also it evolves. So some of the stuff in there we add to. So second bottom adds story points. We were forgetting to put story points in, we updated this. A couple of things we took out because we actually got so good at them, we just did it naturally. We didn't have to involve them in the definition of done anymore. But this should be evolving, and it should be specific to your team. Not specific to the company, not specific to the department, specific for your team. So the way it works for us is we go through at the start, after we've had the requirements and the acceptance criteria, we go through one by one. If it's something we've already done, we'll tick it. If it's something we want to do later, we'll leave it unticked So when we get the story further down, we'll tick it when it happens. And at the very end, when that story moves into a done column, everything should be ticked. But again, it just evolves and keeps going. It's not a one-off thing to look at, it's something to refer to as you go on. Talking about kickoffs, we don't just kick off stories, we'll kick off the bugs as well. That's quite important. We've been bitten a few times. I moved to a team where we didn't do kickoffs for bugs. And what happened then was a fairly straightforward bug. It was validation on a page. A field was given the wrong answer, wrong error message. So I raised the bug. Developer took it, picked it up, and their fix was so much worse than the original bug. They got the right error message, but they put it on a brand new page all by itself in the middle of the page with no way of getting back to the previous page. It was horrendous. It was not customer friendly. It said the right thing, but we hadn't kicked off. We hadn't got that shared understanding. And of course, we were under time pressure. So that awful bug fix is still in our product at the moment. We did not have time to fix it. So we kick off our bugs as well. We get that shared understanding, ensure we know what the scope is, ensure we know what the expected outcome is. We kick off our bugs as well. And additionally, automate as much as you can. So we'll have that initial discussion in the kickoff meeting about what we're going to automate, at what level we're going to automate it. Unit tests, obviously, but then integration tests, end-to-end tests, discuss them up front. How are we going to have this automated? We're going to talk further on about why we want to automate so much stuff. But you need to get it in and also automate anything. So for us, the way automation works is it's a team requirement. We do not hire testers just to do test automation. That's not what we look for in a tester. It's the team's responsibility to do the automation. I have done test automation in the past, and the reason I don't do it now is because every developer on my team is better at that kind of coding than I am. So why am I taking my time to do that when there are better people to do it? So we do it together. We talk about it in the kickoff. We'll talk about what we're going to automate then, the kind of tests we want. I'll be suggesting tests. But then when they've written those tests, I will sit with them. I will watch those tests run. I will suggest new tests. I will make sure that our acceptance criteria is fully automated. I will also look to make sure that our product globally actually covers all the areas we've just been dealing with, and make sure there's no tech debt and automation missing, and we'll add those as well. But it's a joint effort for the team, but it's one the testers get involved with really closely, even though they don't write the tests. I should say that we're kind of halfway through the slides now, and we're still on the kickoff meeting. It's probably worth just emphasizing that and how important that initial meeting is, that joint understanding right at the very start, how imperative it is to how your team works, and how imperative it is for the tester as well. You can automate other stuff as well. If there's any task you're doing multiple times and it's recurring and it's the same over and over again, you should be automating it. So 3 or 4 years ago, we had a manual system for getting new code onto our staging environment. It was a manual process. It was horrible. It took 20 odd steps. And if it went wrong, nobody knew why it went wrong. And we've automated that over the last couple of years, so now everything is fully automated. So don't just look at automating your code, look at all the other recurring tasks that you keep doing, that you keep wasting time on, and try and automate as many of those as you can. So the next thing, I said earlier that we don't hire testers for automation skills. We do hire them for communication. The main thing, though, on the testing side is we hire testers who are good at exploratory testing. You might want to read that quote by Ken Kane about, that's closer, hello, about what his idea of exploratory testing is. Basically, for me, it's using the tester's expertise, knowledge, awareness, instinct, to look past those acceptance criteria and actually look across the rest of the product, how the customers can use it, how it's actually going to be used in that end environment. if you kind of go on the social side of testing, you'll hear there's an argument going about testing versus checking. Checking is that initial acceptance criteria. You know in advance, this is what's going to happen, that's the end result. So when you're actually testing it, you're just checking those things happen. Testing is when you're actually taking your skills as a tester and applying them to that piece of software, looking past that acceptance criteria, looking for the other things that can happen. And that's basically what we hire testers on, is to be able to do that. Use your skills, use your instinct, use your knowledge to explore the applications more than you would do with just the basic checks. The other thing is, we want our testers to pair with other people, everybody else, everybody who can help you. So first of all, pair with the developers. It's the most obvious, straightforward thing. When I started, we did not do that. The first company I worked for, specifically as a tester, testers were on one floor, developers were on a different floor. Unless something went really badly, we never even talked to them. There are days now, but you know, but that's the way. But that's not the way we work anymore. We're a collaborative team now. It is a team effort now. It's not us and them. It's just us. So pair up with developers. Pair up with other testers. Either testers who are more experienced than you and get their knowledge. Testers who are junior than you, and then you can share your knowledge with them. Maybe they know the application you're working on more than you do, but you're going to share that knowledge, share that expertise across your department. Get the product owners involved and test with them as well. One of the problems I'm sure you've all experienced is when you spend like 6 weeks on a project, you get to the end, it's all perfect as far as you're concerned, you give it to the product owner and they say, that's not what I wanted. That's happened too much in the past, so we try to ensure now that any demos we do, anything early, that as soon as we can show something to a product owner, we will show it to the product owner. And also we're talking about DevOps and things going live and thinking about that early, so pair with somebody from Ops. If there's something specifically is new, that's going to go live, then you want Ops involved early on, make sure they know what you're doing, make sure they know how to support it, make sure they've given you their feedback as well. So get everybody involved early. Kitten. I keep thinking this must be kitten porn, but I'm sure I can't really say that. Anywho, so for me, the major thing about shifting left for a tester is getting that testing done early, and for me that is testing on the developer's machine, not waiting till we get to a test environment. It's seeing that code. As soon as a piece of code is written and there's something that works, I want to see it on the developer's machine. I don't want to wait a day, an hour, a week to see it on the test environment because, again, they've moved on from that point. If I see it on the developer's machine and I find something wrong, I can tell them then, I can have a drink, and they're in the code. They're there. There's no context switching. They're in that code. If something is wrong and you find it on the developer's machine, they will fix it there and then. You do not have to raise a bug report. You do not have to get it triaged. They will see it. It's not working. You've paired up with them. They will just fix it. It's much quicker for them. It's much quicker for you. And it's much quicker for whatever company you work for. So that's probably the most powerful thing we do is that testing on the developer's machine. It can be slightly more complicated, but equally more powerful. I've done UI testing with developers, and it's not on their machine, but I'm either sat next to them or sometimes actually remotely in a completely different office. They are in the code. I am remoted into their developer machine, their virtual machine on their box. So I am testing it as they are writing the code. I'm finding things wrong with it, passing them a post-it note, and it's fixed within 5-10 seconds. When I first started, you were lucky if you got something fixed within 2 or 3 days. It didn't happen. What would happen was you'd have to wait till the code got on the test environment. You would then have to test it. You would then find a bug. You'd have to retest the bug. You'd have to check it on all your browsers. You have to find the minimum number of steps. You then have to write out the bug report. You then have to get that triaged. Somebody then would have to decide that needs to be fixed. That would then go back to the developer. The developer would pick it up. As long as they understand it, they would fix it. If they couldn't, they would have to get you involved. They would then put the code back in. You'd have to wait to get back on the test environment, and then maybe you could retest it and make sure it was okay. 2 days was a good turnaround then. Now we do that in 10, 20 seconds. So you should be testing it on the developer's machine, not waiting until you get it on the test environment. So use whatever tools are the right tools. As testers, we are not defined by the tools we use. We should just be able to use the right tools for what we're testing. So these are the tools we use. Confluence is our kind of a wiki. Jira is where we have our stories and bugs. Browser dev tools, you should be using those as your tester. Open them up, whatever browser you're on, get the information, the data from those. We talked about API first, so Postman, Swagger. We're a telephony company, so Wireshark monitors that. Interested in security, you should be interested in security. Burp Suite and Zap for your security testing. Papertrail, Kibana, Grafana, error reporting, monitoring, alerting. MindMap for mind maps. But again, everybody in this room will have more things they can add to that list. But it's what's best for you, what's best for the project you're on at the time you're on it. If I'd written this 5 years ago, it would be 50% would be a different list, and half of those tools I used 5 years ago don't even exist anymore. So we shouldn't be defined by the tools we use. We should just use the right tools at the right time. Does anybody know what this picture's from? That's because you asked me. If you ever see a film called Dead Ringers, David Cronenberg, very disturbing. Try and watch it. Jeremy Irons plays identical twins who go a bit mad. Good film. Other thing about testing. Teach your team to test. Now, this is often controversial. One of the problems we have as testers, which Alex mentioned earlier, is you end up being the testing bottleneck. Even you're trying to do all the right stuff, and then one day you'll look around in the test column and you've got 20 things, and the developer's only working on 2 things, and there's no way you can get through them. And this used to happen to us. And we made a conscious decision in the team that I was in that actually we'd change the way we work. We wouldn't be a bottleneck as testers anymore. Because we're 1 or 2 testers in the team. Somebody goes on holiday, somebody has an additional role, somebody gets ill. Suddenly it just all backs up. So we changed the way we work. So now we kind of look at our testers as the people in charge of the testing, but not the people who necessarily do all the testing within the team. So we've kind of introduced some of our developers into testing the code as well. Not their code, because nobody can test their own stuff. You will not find any errors on your own stuff. I kind of learned that when I was a developer, which is why I stopped, because the most annoying thing as a developer is when somebody else finds bugs on your code. I could not stand it, so I went back to testing. So we make sure that you do not test your own code, but we are happy for other developers to test your code. The testers will oversee the testing. Initially what we did was we let the developers do it. They produce notes and summaries. We then review them, feed back into them more tests they could do, other ways they could test it, other things they hadn't thought of. But then their knowledge kind of built up about how they could test stuff. And the benefits we got out of that were more than we thought they'd be. It wasn't just our bottleneck disappeared, because it did, and our feedback loop reduced, because that did as well, because now nothing was in the test con for so long, but also our developers got that better understanding of what we as testers were doing, what we were looking for, the types of tests we were doing. So the developers were aware of that right from the very start when they were then coding their next piece of information, their next application. And they built that testing knowledge into their coding. So the quality of their code got better. We found less bugs in the developers' code who'd actually done some testing. So we've kept that going. And that's really powerful for us. General thing as a tester. Following 3 things I'm going to talk about are a waste of time if you're a tester. If you are a tester or if you have testers and they are spending a lot of their time doing the next 3 things, you need, 15 minutes, you need to change your process. Number one, running manual regression. This is a waste of your time. This is a waste of anybody's time. More than that, as a tester, it's the most soul-destroying piece of work you can do. Running manual regression is running the same test every week in the hope that you get exactly the same result every week. So 5 years ago, we were really pleased we got our manual regression down to half a day a week and half the testing. And that was pretty good, because actually, I used to work for a company called Specsavers many years ago, and we did 2 weekly sprints, and actually that at that point was really good. We were doing 2 weekly releases of code, but the regression was 2.5 days and the entire test team just doing manual regression. So when we got it down to half a day and half the team, we thought that was good. Now it's one tester, 1 hour a week, and it's not really manual regression, it's just a smoke check. We've automated all of it now. We do not want to spend our time just doing the same tests again and again and again. And because we've got about 18 testers, that means I only do manual regression about once every 3 months for 1 hour. And I can live with that. That's okay. But if you're doing much more than that, then you need to be looking at automating it. It is not helping anybody just run the same test for the same reason, so automate it. This could be controversial. Writing test cases. If you spend your time writing test cases, you're wasting your time. I haven't written a test case possibly 7 or 8 years now. If we think about it, test cases, you kind of spend your time in advance of the code coming out, writing a whole list of things that are pretty similar to an acceptance criteria, where you know what the outcome's going to be. So actually, let's just automate that. If you know what the outcome is, automate it from the start. You never have to write a test case, and you never have to run test cases. The test cases I've run in the past, I spent one project, 6 months we wrote test cases, 6 months testing it. Any test cases we wrote, which took us 6 months, remember, we used to run maybe twice, and then we'd never run them again. And all that work we put into writing these test cases, that as soon as you run them twice, they're just gone. It's just documentation you don't need. It's dead documentation. So if you're spending lots of time writing test cases, work out why you're actually doing that. What benefit is that giving you? Is that long-term benefit, or is that just a document you're going to throw away in 2 or 3 months? Last thing, waste of time for a tester is writing bug reports. I hate writing bug reports. I used to be really good at writing bug reports. I used to thrive on finding bugs and writing them up. I used to put on my CV how many bugs I found on applications. I was that pleased with it at the start of my career. I did have at least 3 different projects where I raised over 1,000 bugs on each individual project. Nowadays, I think this year I might have raised about 15, and that's possibly too many. A good week I don't find any bugs that I have to raise a bug report on. Reason for that is we're doing that testing earlier. We've had the conversations at the start. We've talked to the developers in the kickoff. We've made it clear what we're going to test, what we're looking for. They've coded it. They've coded the higher quality. Then we're testing it on their machine. We're finding the stuff really quickly. They're fixing it really quickly. Feedback loop, minimal. I don't have to raise a bug report. And again, you think about it, if you do raise a bug report, you spend all that time having to rerun it, recheck it, check it on all the browsers, get it triaged, get the priorities in, argue about whether it should be fixed or not. And then it gets fixed, and then that's dead documentation again. Documentation you never need again. So if you're spending a lot of your time doing that, think about it. Think about why you're finding those bugs, why you're finding them late, why you're having to raise the bug reports. And maybe make a change if you can. One way to sum all that up would be when the code reaches the test environment, that should be the last time you see it, not the first time you see it. You should know when it gets that test environment what it's going to do, what it looks like. You should have tested it already. There should be no surprises on the test environment. You will find some issues, so obvious ones would be environmental. Our test environment is slightly more advanced than our dev environment. We might find environmental stuff. or we might find bugs in the deployment process. But most of the other stuff, there's no reason why we couldn't have found it earlier on the dev machine, whatever way you want to work it. But test environment should no longer be the first place we see code, it should be the last place we see code. And just lastly, kind of on the process, if you are getting the number of bugs you've raised down to a few, then actually look at why those bugs are occurring. So we use something called a 5 whys, but basically it's a way of looking into the kind of the root analysis, because a bug report is basically failure demand. Something's gone wrong, and this is what's gone wrong, and this is what you need to do to fix it. It's not why it went wrong. So why did that bug get in the first place? Was it a requirement you missed, something you didn't talk about in the kickoff? Is it some test you should have automated? Why didn't you find it on the dev machine? So have a look at why the bugs are getting onto your test environment. Think about it, think about the cause of that, and see if you can prevent further bugs from happening. You don't want to just fix the next bug, you want to actually prevent it from happening in the first place. Almost penultimate slide. The other thing we kind of advise our testers to do is to kind of get out there a bit. So I've talked about the test community, and there is a vibrant test community out there in the ether on the net, and I didn't know that when I joined this company. I had no experience of that. I was just a tester who I thought was working well, but in my own little bubble, in my own company. But we advise our testers to actually get out there, kind of get involved. So read books, there's lots of good books. We've talked about a few in the slides. If you're kind of new to testing in Agile, there's 2 books called Agile Testing and More Agile Testing by Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory. They're definitely worth it if you're kind of new to the Agile testing side. Blogs, again, there is so much information that people are putting into blogs these days. So the way I do it is I get on Twitter, I follow actually about 30, 40 decent testers now, find out the blogs from them. But there are good people out there, and they are willing to help. They are willing to share their knowledge. And actually, if you send them a message, they are going to help you. They are really, actually, you will be really surprised at how much time you can get out of the well-known testers. So something like Lisa Crispin, if you send her a message, she will respond. And she will get back to you, and she will have that conversation with you. So get on social media. Even if you're just following people, you don't have to go on and start blogging and tweeting, but just kind of see the information that's out there, because there's lots of information out there. In the UK, we have something called the Ministry of Test, which, if you've heard about Test Bash, that's kind of the organisation that runs the Test Bash conferences is the Ministry of Test. But they have a website, and it is a huge font of knowledge for testing. So if you're looking for any kind of testing knowledge, information, Ministry of Test is a good place to start. And the interesting thing is, I joined NewVoiceMedia, and I was hired by a guy called Rob Lambert, who was possibly the king of social testing. He was called the social tester, but he actually helped set up the Ministry of Test as well. But that's kind of where our culture of getting involved on the social side of testing happened. Conferences are great. Go to conferences. There are great conferences in Poland. We have great conferences in the UK. Europe has a really vibrant conference thing going on. There are some really great conferences. You've probably heard of Eurostar, Agile Testing Days, Test Bash, but every country has their own ones, but they're good not just for going along and seeing the speakers, which obviously is a remarkable thing to happen, but also for me, I don't go to talk, I go for the conversations afterwards. This bit I could do without quite easily, but actually going to the bar, going to the places afterwards, talking to other people, talking about their problems, talking about testing, how they test, where they test, that's the bit that interests me, so that's why I go to conferences. And sixthly, also there's all this online learning stuff. So get online, see what's there, various courses all over the place, find something that's good for you, that works for what you're doing, but get involved, try, learn more. Kitten, dog. Any questions?